Hello and welcome back to Scale War Machines and this video on painting figures' faces in 5 easy steps. We'll be using Young Miniature's WW1 Stormtrooper bust, and as the recent All Quiet on the Western Front film came out, this inspired me to finish this video. This is of course a 1/10 scale resin bust, and the quality of the Young Miniature's products is of course amazing. Construction is slightly different with resin. Everything has pouring plugs, so you need a variety of tools, including small razor saws, larger razor saws, and of course some power tools, which will make assembly and preparation much easier. Step 1 is to clean up all the parts. This is of course common with all model kits, but with resin it's particularly important as you need to remove the moulding plugs. I find this sander from Minicraft to be especially useful. I worked my way around just cleaning off as best as I could all the pouring plugs from the resin casting process. I also used a mini drill with a little drum sander and handheld sanding sticks. Next, to make handling the parts easier, I drilled them, and that allowed me to insert cuticle pushers or wooden sticks. Now you can see with resin, safety is a consideration. It creates a lot of dust, so wear suitable protection. And here you can see all the parts, great quality of course. They're all cleaned up. I gave them a quick wash in soapy water. And that means everything is ready for the next step. This is priming and filling, and I used Andrea's white aerosol primer, which is excellent, and just misted over first a key coat and then thicker coats all over the parts. The product gives a good coverage and a nice even surface for later painting. Now in terms of assembly, there was a slight gap here between the greatcoat and the collar. I used Deluxe Materials' excellent Perfect Plastic Putty, which is water based. I filled it and then smoothed it over with sculpting tools and cotton buds or Q-tips with a bit of water. You can also use a flat brush. That did a good job of cleaning everything up, and next we can start on the face. And I'm going to start by framing out the eyes using this reference from the excellent Andrea Colour acrylic paints. Now this is not a masterclass. I don't pretend to be an expert figure painter by any stretch of the imagination, but I do have various techniques that I hope will be useful for beginners. And on YouTube, the figure painting videos seem to be somewhat popular. Next, I mixed up an off-white colour and used that just to touch up around the framing I'd done. And also to give the eyeballs an off-white colour. There you can see the framing of the eyes done, first in that red colour and then touched up with the white. I just went over everything again one more time using the red reference, tidied everything up and made sure it was looking a bit more well defined. That's stage 1 of the eyes, and the next is to pick out the iris or the coloured parts of the eye. I used the excellent blue set from Andrea and the 2 references that you saw on screen. They were used just to roughly sketch out the shape of the iris. You can see I went for a lighter shade for the outer iris, so that was the blue mixed with a bit of off-white. And there's a darker core to the centre of the iris. Again, this video is intended to give quick and easy and simple steps for people who want to paint. So as you can see, this is really quite messy at this stage. I've just blocked it out. There's no ambition to get everything perfect at this stage, and you can see me go back in with the off-white just to tidy everything up and get the shape, and this will go on for some time. Having a good brush is key here. These are fine pointed brushes. I tend to use ones from Hysterex Agents. They're Kolinsky Sable, but I've also got some excellent brushes from Andrea and from Life Colour. Okay, I'm back in with a sort of lightened version of those blues. Again, just reshaping the lighter part of the iris around the pupils. It's a case of kind of making sure the look of the eyes and the placement is symmetrical and natural looking. At this stage I've added even more off-white, reference on screen, and that creates a little inner highlight that I applied as so. Now you can see an attempt to build on that inner highlight, again using the lightened blue mix. This is kind of nerve-wracking stuff, but you want to try and get it around the pupil. Sometimes I just tap the eyebrow, for example, just to make sure the paint is going to go where I want. So I use the third blue from that set. That gives me a much darker blue, and that allows me just to create various little details around the edge of the iris. Then I go in with off-white and just create a bit of space and neaten up the lower edge of the iris. That may seem counterintuitive having framed it before, but I want to get that sort of the look of the figurine right. It helps me to have a tiny bit of space under the iris. I've gone back to the framing colour, and that allows me just to sketch out one last time and frame the eyes, leaving a tiny bit of space underneath the blue of the iris. It will depend on the nature of the figure, the look, and if you like, the sculpture of the face as to whether you need space under the eyes, but in this case it worked quite well to have a little bit of white under the iris. And there you can see it gives that kind of makeup eyeliner effect. And I sealed everything with Johnson's Clear, which is just an acrylic floor polish. You could use any varnish. So still not perfect by any means, but good enough for step 4. We can move on to the skin tones and flesh tones. There's an excellent set by Andrea called their Flesh Paint set, and really I just followed the intended sequence of paints in that set, starting off with their base flesh shade, applied thin and just used to block everything around the face, being careful not to paint over the eyes obviously, but you can leave a bit of the sort of framing colour you create earlier. You'll see me just try and just put flesh paint on all the key areas and carefully go up to that dark red framing colour without painting fully over it. These sort of sets and the Andrea colour paints are excellent at helping you. This particular set I've reviewed before and used a few times, and it's really good. The paints have a really nice quality to them. They do need a couple of applications, as you can see in this shot. So that was the first coat, and then I went back once it had dried and applied the second. They do dry really matte, which I like. They can be quite fragile, but that's also due to the fact that they're really matte. So that's after a couple of coats, and you can see the finish you get from the base colour. Number 2 in the set is a darker shadow colour, quite orangey, and you'll see me apply it in all the areas of shadow. It will look quite extreme at this stage, but just paint it in thin coats and then blend it with a wide flat brush. The point is you're not using a round tip brush, you're using something flat to blend the edges. At this stage, looking fairly extreme. The key is not to be too worried by that because the highlights will tie everything together. Try to hit all the little shadows, bags, creases in the forehead, around the lips, nostrils and so on. It looks like he's got a very heavy tan there, so it's important to go back to the original flesh shade and start to then map out further highlights or just blend everything. And this process will be repeated with lightened versions. I start off just with the version pretty much out the bottle, maybe just slightly lighter, and blend that over the top of all the shadows. In effect, this gives a kind of mid-tone, I would say, a mid-highlight. And you can see me trying to work on the cheekbones and areas that protrude forwards on the face. As you can see, it's starting to create contrast between shadow and light. The iris and pupils, even though they weren't perfect, are pretty much good enough for this stage, allowing me to continue with the structure and flesh tones of the face itself. If need be, I can always go in and tweak things. But actually, once you start blocking out the face, it starts to make you realise that the eyes, whilst important, are not everything. They don't have to be absolutely 100% perfect in my opinion. I mean, like I say, this is for beginners, it's not intended to win any competitions or anything. It's just to try and get half decent results for people who maybe never tried painting a somewhat large scale figure or bust, just like this. Using an ever so slightly lightened version of number 1 in the set, the original base flesh mix. Just trying to keep things neat and tidy around the eyes themselves. Ideally, what I'd like by the end of this is to have ultra thin red line or deep red line that would imitate the sort of blood vessels / eyelashes around the eye. There's progress so far. The real highlights begin now with the third reference in the set, which is a lot lighter, and these are your most stark highlights, I'd say. I do go even further later on, which you'll see, but at this stage, in terms of just your blocking out the face, these are your main highlights. And same principles apply. I'm just hitting the sort of most prominent features, the largest highlight areas, cheekbones, etc., nose. You can go really quite stark with this if you wish to. Any tidying up can of course be done. If you catch it quick, you can remove things with the flat brush. You also may need to go in again with the deeper shadows and so on, just to repair any mistakes. You can also make it quite irregular and mottled, because skin after all does vary in tonality and texture. And that's what we get. We've done deep shadows, midtones and highlights. We resume, and the next stage is to add the hair. This again is applied using an Andrea colour set, their brown set. And I used a mixture of their number 6, which is the darkest shade, and some of the lighter shades to create contrast in the hair, and even some streaks to try and allude to strands of hair. You can also at this point pick out the eyebrows. The eyebrows are something I find tremendously difficult. Basically go really thin, watered down coats. Don't use, thick applications of paint. Just try and pick them all out in a way that is somewhat realistic. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. All the accessories and so on I'll cover in another video, but they can all be painted up. And here's how he looks at this stage. For the next step, I'm going to tackle the lips. I use these references you can see from the flesh coloured set and create a crimsony colour, which I'll use to pick out the lips. They'll look quite fake initially, but if you blend it, you start to get a bit of colour on the lips. Just going in with this thin flat brush helps. Now, it does look a little bit lipsticky to me, but I went round with my highlight colours and just started trying to blend everything a bit better, including around the lips, the eyelashes, eye bags and so on, to get a feel for the highlights within the face and see how it's progressing. Anything like those red lips can easily be toned down just with thin washes or glazes of, say, the first flesh tone. More brown was added to the flesh mix, and that was applied in recesses like the ears, around the neck and the collar. And that allowed me to then go back with the original flesh base just to tone everything down and blend it. Applied extremely thin. And there again, mixing, blending, highlights, and here the brown was added to the mix to create a 5 o'clock shadow, which again is put on super thin, almost like a glaze, and blended. Here a particularly thicker, wider flat brush will help. So I'm doing highlights and deepest shadows all at the same time. Okay, and that's how it's going. So I've gone back to an ultrafine brush, the brightest highlight if you like, and that's used to pick out the structure of the lips and make the upper lip seem a bit more highlighted than the lower lip and the 5 o'clock shadow. You can also go in and tweak things like the nose highlights and the creases around the mouth as well. And there he is. In the next video I'll paint the uniform and accessories, and we'll see the bust come together, along with the final touches. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope it encourages you to tackle some busts with some simple techniques and painting sets like the excellent Andrea colour acrylic sets. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time. Bye.
Subscribe for our latest videos.